Good.
All right. Just going. I write in love and solidarity to everyone who is unwilling to accept injustice. No matter what country, what language, what beliefs you carry, if your heart aches and bleeds for the people, my heart is with you. I was at a meeting recently, and a lady said to me there is no use in looking at the differences between natives and settler colonists. I was infuriated because this is one of the many tactics of white supremacy. Her previously hurt feelings have led her to go onwards to deny our material reality. For me, this has been a constant frustration with anarchists. Generally, they are the all lives matter people of hating capitalism. They often bury revolutionary efforts and history intentionally and unintentionally. The only people who benefit from hiding our history and revolutionary theory are our oppressors. So very quickly, I'd like to walk through Marxist feminism. 12,000 years ago began the agricultural revolution. Farms cropped up, and with people settling in one place as opposed to the history of moving endlessly as hunter-gatherers, things changed really fast. As hunter-gatherers, it made sense to have few children because food would always be insecure. As farmers tended the land, they needed laborers. This created a large demand for moms to birth many children. In many cases, so many of the children would die. 12,000 years ago, we did not have the space age technology that we have today. This foray into the age of agriculture drove inequality and continued to lay the foundation of growing power imbalances. Private property was born when farmers began to build up more and more production and began to use class relations. They began to use their hands, then their wives, then their children, then their employees. The exploitation of paying an employee less than they produce and dictating how they work is called expropriation. I wasn't there, so I can't vouch for it personally, but before agriculture, for 188,000 years, there was the potential for free love. This was matrilineal society. They had the potential for people to live, love, and sleep with people as they wished. But with private property and the desire to acquire more, the landowners put a stop to women's freedom and instituted monogamy so that they could know who their offspring were, so that they could pass down their land and their wealth. Putting an end to women's freedom to sleep with people freely and set up the institution of monogamy did not stop the landowners, though, from wanting to sleep with women whenever they wanted to. So that developed the origin of prostitution. Landowners wielded power over the landless who worked for the landowners. Men wielded power over women, and parents wielded power over children. This is the economic foundation of oppression. Under capitalist society, the only rights we have are the ones that we can afford. We cannot let human rights remain as commodities. With capitalism being built on exploitation, it means there's a zero-sum equation where a huge amount of suffering is required for one class for the privilege of another. This leads our capitalist ruling class to squeeze higher and higher amounts of wealth out of us. This leads to colonialism. It led to chattel slavery, and it leads slavery and genocide to this day. Capitalism must grow or it will die. The same is true of two other things, which are black holes and cancer. So with Marxist feminism, we can examine the foundation of cis-heteropatriarchy. I never studied sociology in college or university. I don't have a bachelor's degree. I'm just some guy. But this term is incredibly important. In 20 letters, this scientific framework, or an incredibly long study of history, we can understand the inequality that exists. With one word, we convey and affirm that the class relationship is not the only factor in oppression. We see oppression become more and more complex. We see the economic basis of oppression built between men and women. We see privilege given to one group over another, again and again. This is what lets us see who is likely to assimilate and who is likely to fight. We see this class divide between ruling class and working class, between men and women, between landlords and tenants, between straight and queer, between cis and trans, between workers and sex workers, between abled and disabled, between Canadian and Indigenous, between later immigrants and new immigrants. But how does this relate to Palestine? The class divisions and increasing volume of power inequalities has one more element. This is the element of imperialism. This is the division of power between the imperialist countries and the exploited countries. Not long ago, $500 billion in gas was found underwater off the coast of Palestine. But it is not simply about money. The US's intent on destabilizing the region to destroy revolutions and prevent the rejections of US NATO hegemony. Libya and Norway both nationalized oil in their countries. But since Norway is a founding member of NATO, it is safe from being bombed for the crime of societal-wide, state-led pro-social developments. And Libya now has open slave markets after the US blew up the country under the false claim that Gaddafi had chemical weapons, while Norway continues to buy weapons from Lockheed Martin and Boeing. This relationship grants them comfort in being a henchman, lackey nation state to the United States. I want to say, fuck Norway. They can also take their nationalized oil and invest in other... Fuck Norway. They also take their nationalized oil and invest in other countries. During that meeting, I was so angry with those people. I kept my cool so I could win the other people with the truth and the history. I told her about the Indian Act as an apartheid legislation that began 4 years after the federation of the illegitimate Canadian state. I told her that a percentage of all resources taken were supposed to be given back by the corporations, and this has never ever been upheld. I told her about there being meaningful work across the reserve that pays minimum wage or a few dollars more than minimum wage, with no work at all paying well. I was so hurt and so mad, but I held it in. I did not tell them that the only business owners and people elected to participate in the colonial government had money, and that everybody back home else is poor. I shared with her the privatization of the fishing industry and how our way of life had been commodified and taken from us. I told them that this starvation and deprivation is why some of us are willing to sell out. Another huge component of Marxist feminism is examining domestic labor. Under agricultural and capitalist hegemony, domestic labor had been relegated to women and the work has been devalued. If you clean a car, you can make $50 to $100 an hour, and they call it detailing. But if you clean anything else in society, you're paid minimum wage or you're only paid in psychological favor. Even then, much of the time that goes is unappreciated. The organization of capitalist society sees to it that domestic labor is not valued financially or psychologically. This leads us to witnessing that across society, work that is deemed women's work is always underpaid. There was one economist from India that calculated one estimate that if domestic labor was paid minimum wage, it would equal $10.9 trillion across the world. The absence of this is one of the factors that Native women are in so much danger under colonialism. Palestinians are the only people who have bigger families than Natives. And with big families comes a huge amount of domestic labor. This labor is a labor of love, of support, of taking care of our community. This work is disproportionately done by women, children, and elders. This goes to show that humanity is not lazy. We are driven to help. We are driven to support each other. A starving man will freely share the last few bites of food that he has. The foundational difference between the left and the right, between Palestinians and the Israelis, between a single mom and an investor, between a land offender in prayer and a cop, is that we are not driven by our desire for power, we are driven by our humanity. So when people repeat propaganda about natives being lazy, What they are telling us is that they do not value domestic labor. So from that, we can see it is not a large jump to see that they do not have healthy values or relationships. With these topics, we have some of the science of dialectical materialism to examine the long process of marginalization and how it drives gendered violence. With this, we have a glimpse at how 1,300 to 4,000 Native women in this nation state have been pushed to the outskirts of our society and murdered. A few years ago, the estimate for missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and queer youth in the United States was 5,500. So we have 5,500 plus families that have been obliterated. Native women exist at the intersection of class relations and colonialism. This violence is so abundant due to the economic situation, which is why it is important for us to fight for the material rights that what we currently exist as commodities. My favorite quote from a Georgian political activist says, quote, "It is difficult for me to imagine what personal liberty is enjoyed by an unemployed person who goes about hungry and cannot find employment. Real liberty can only exist where exploitation has been abolished, where there is no oppression of some by others, where there is no unemployment and poverty, where a man is not haunted by the fear of tomorrow being deprived of work, of home, and of bread. Only in such a society is real, and not on paper, personal and every other liberty is possible." End quote. This conception of freedom is what we need to reduce violence and bring harmony to our society. This is what we need if we are to alleviate the forest fire of gendered violence that our people experience. Palestinians have developed a word for a parent whose children have died. In the Native community, there are lots of people who are exactly that. An elderly neighbor of ours has 5 children that she has outlived. I know many elders who have had children that they have outlived. This disruption of the natural order of life is a direct result of colonialism. If you are listening to this, I want you to carry something for me. Instead of associating the word manifest with hope, I want you to associate it with genocide. Manifest destiny is the official term for colonization here. The genocide of manifest destiny is why I am among the 94% of natives on this continent who speak English and not our traditional language. I also ask you to carry hate for people who daydream of starting a commune. Communes are for cowards who want indigenous land for themselves to grow food and vibe with their friends, role-playing as a revolutionary while forsaking class struggle and the marginalized. This colonial aspiration is close and reachable for colonists, but it is a betrayal. It is an effort to hide and separate oneself from the capitalist system. We cannot hide. We must stand and fight. We must look to the Yemenis, to the Lebanese, to Iran, to Cuba, to revolutionaries internationally, and to Palestine. Their strength and unity is a testimony to what humanity can accomplish. Their unwavering determination is the pinnacle of revolution. We need theory, courage, and commitment. These 3 elements transform people. This is the contrast between the capitalist focus of the individual and the Marxist focus on everyone. Alone, isolated, the individual is powerless. An orphaned baby bird would not survive. Alone, a human would not survive. Alone, we are but a twig drifting down a river, aimless, tossed about, having no footing, power, or determination against the will of the all-encompassing rush of the current. It is only through organizing and collective action that we are able to advance beyond our individual power. It is only through that we are finally able to build a dam against the ever-coursing river of injustice. When the twig comprises a nest for the family of birds or dams the river. It is the collective that becomes the sustainer of life and the will of the people. Thank you for your time.